well, you joke that I make people work for free, but the talk is really about that. So like very much on the spot. So hello. I thought it's probably good to start with introducing myself because I figured, Jenkins might be a bit old software that not all of you might know it. But I created this project. I started working on it in 2004, and that's the logo, Mr. Jenkins. And I was told by the designer of the logo that this red circle behind it is like an homage to a Japanese flag, rising sun. So I was like, okay, that's great. So this is a popular continuous integration system. And I think at this point it's got about 300,000 installations around the world, and the thousands of contributors. It's now a project under Continuous Delivery Foundations. So I'd like to think it's like it made a real impact in the world. I think about why this project was that successful. And obviously, there's a big part of it was I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. But I did some design in the way like a community is structured, this organization is structured. And I'd like to think that was one key to the success. So that's the story that I wanted to tell today. But that story kind of predates the birth of the Jenkins project. So this was around, I think, the 2001 to that time. So a couple of years before I started Jenkins. I was working at a company called Sun Microsystems. This was their headquarters. I don't know, does anybody know what Sun Microsystems is? It's already gone now. Oh, great. You're my folks. Perfect. And it's really depressing to talk to younger people and sound like, is that like a Sun Microsoft? Like, no, please. But by the time I was there, the company was already going down, like in the downhill, so layoff after layoff. So the company was really trying to survive, and I was just like a soldier, like a one engineer working on the front line. But the company was trying like all sorts of desperate moves, and one of the Hail Mary moves that the CEO decided to do was just like open source everything, Like, we're going to open source service or Java or whatever, and then something happens, and then we make profit in the end. So that, obviously, the history told us that didn't pan out, but that was a great environment for the individual projects. So the team that I was in, we are producing this thing called the platform, Java Enterprise Edition, that's the name of it. It's a platform for application developer to build the app. And then I was, like one small part of it. And my project was chosen as a guinea pig to try out this thing called open source. So the idea is we're going to open source this whole Java EE thing. But those are like 200 engineers that are working on it. We are not going to just send 200 people doing open source. So there's a team of 4 people, we were sent off to try the first open sourcing. We found out in that process that there's very little contributor tractions. We always had users because the Sun was popular, and then stuff that we are producing were free. So everything we produced, millions of people are looking at it. But the idea behind open sourcing it was that we wanted to have more contributors to push the project faster. And that didn't happen. I mean, in some sense, in retrospect, that's obvious because if just open sourcing it, it's going to magically boost the productivity, then nobody would have to struggle. But it was interesting to kind of experience that on the forefront, and I started wondering why. So the one is clearly nobody was just implementing what somebody else told you to do, right? This whole project was about, there's these specifications so vendors came together, defined the specifications, and this project was about implementing that spec. So nobody just wanted to spend their spare time implementing somebody else's spec. That doesn't make any sense. Obvious, right? The other thing was that the coordination was pretty painful, right? So there's this spec that we are trying to implement. So the way we are working was okay, we divide this up in 4 ways because we had 4 engineers. And so you implement that, I implement that, and so on and so forth. Now, if somebody else joined, they have to figure out where we're going to make them work, right? We have these things the meetings between engineers and so on in the Pacific, at 10 a.m. every Thursday Pacific time. But no volunteer contributor is going to show up in 10 a.m. Pacific time meeting. Again, that was obvious, but those are the problems. So But we are the guinea pig, so we are given some freedom to experiment with things. So I started thinking, okay, what if we, like create this plugin mechanism, like interface that allows other contributors to build on top of it. And that actually went well. So we had like maybe 4 or 5 people from various different parts of the world built on top of this interface to extend this project to do some other things that we didn't think about. And that was valuable for users, so it gave us more talking point that this project was useful. So I felt a good traction in that approach. And then around this time, I also, on my hobby, I was one of those developers who had too much spare time. So I contributed like code to various open source projects. And then one of the projects that was named Cargo Project. And so I submitted a patch, right? Or I guess the modern version of it is called pull request, but that was the same idea. But what they had is they had this like a ridiculous code formatting rules that every method can only have one return statement, or like the nesting of the control statement cannot go deeper than 3, or that each function has to be smaller than 30 lines or stuff like that. So I wrote a function in patch, I was using it, but then I had to spend like hours figuring out, okay, like how to refactor this code just to satisfy this like a linter. And then I lost my patience, and I instantly lost my interest. Like I'm doing this for my hobby, mind you, and I'm not interested in like, yeah, so that was bad. So I realized in that there was this like a trust problem that's inherent in this, is that the maintainer of the project had no idea who I am. Like there's this crazy Asian dude. He couldn't probably even tell that I'm an Asian because he only see my email address, right? So he couldn't trust that the code I'm producing is of any quality, so he has to set up this bar. Then I know that I'm capable developer, or at least like I thought I was a capable developer. So when I saw this like lack of trust from them, that was instantly demotivating. So those were the kind of foundational experience that I had, and then that informed me how to design the Jenkins community. So one of the crazy things that I did in the Jenkins community is like I made this thing like a plugins all the way down. So the whole system was put together by a bunch of plugins. And then I gave autonomy to anybody who wants. So each plugin, I kind of gave it away to anybody who wanted to do it. So we made this policy that if anybody raises a hand, you're the committer. There's no code review. There's no like approving yourself for the value. I just gave it away. So what that did, that did 2 things. The one is it gave every engineer, every contributor, much bigger autonomy. Each piece of the puzzle is now owned by you. You can do whatever you want inside it. So they don't have to have a meeting. They don't have to coordinate. So that was good. The second thing was it also minimized the collaborations. So you could really do whatever. The other thing that happened was that it sort of made it clear how you contribute to this project, how you make the impact by writing a plugin, right? It's always surprisingly hard for people outside. So open source project is like a bunch of friends like doing something. So when you're a new guy showing up to the group, there's this period in which you have to figure out how this group behaves, right? Like that's true with any human gathering, I think. Like if you show up in the in-laws family over Thanksgiving, like how do they communicate? Like what do you say gets interpreted in what way, etc. So when everything became a writing plugin, that meant okay, you wanted to do something, great. You write a plugin. You have this idea to integrate this with I don't know, like a Microsoft Teams, great. You write a plugin. So it became every answer. And that process became so repeatable. And you can see plenty of examples lying around to get the feel of, oh, this is what I'm expected to do. So that made it really easy for new people to come in, kind of do as what Romans do, and then build what they want. And that's really what they wanted to do. They just wanted to turn their ideas into reality. And my job was to get out of the way as quickly as possible. So that was the kind of how this team or the community was put together. Now, what that meant was that the whole ecosystem was shall I say, a little bit chaotic, right? Like whenever one problem had 3 solutions, we had 5 plugins, like trying all of those and more. Right? But then what happens was, then the natural selection kicks in. So the users pick the one they think they like. Some contributors lose motivations, and then they start to consolidate. People start to consolidate around a few, and the failing experiments gets lost in the wayside. The thriving, more adapting species, plugins that dominate. So that created a lot of resilience, and in some ways, like it allows everybody to flourish, like a let 100 flowers bloom kind of thing. So I still remember, like one time, one of the contributors came up with this idea. They thought, what if we add like a weather icon to kind of represent the status of the automation? Like it's sunny if everything going great, but if it's going to be like the umbrella icon if there's a lot of failures. And I was like, wow, what a stupid idea, right? Like it made no sense to me. Like, but because of this mechanism, I didn't have to say that. All I needed to say was, okay, that sounds like a great idea. Go write a plugin. Right? And if that doesn't work, like who cares? But it turns out that that was a great success. Right? And this also happens because my view, like any individual's view is limited, right? So if I'm the one that's calling all the shots, then I'd be beholden to my own mistakes. But I didn't, in these cases, like I didn't have to get in the way. Like, he did all the work, and then he owns all the success, obviously. But because of the fact that I was able to like let him do that, the system, the mechanism, the organization, the community allowed him to do these things. We were able to collectively benefit from a lot. So, that in some sense, those are somewhat unique in the open source experience. Like in a corporate setup, you don't make people work for free. But later, this Jenkins project became popular enough, so I and other founders started this company called CloudBees, and we did some enterprise businesses around Jenkins. So I became a CTO, so it's a proper corporate setup with engineering team, right? But it turns out that some of these same experiences and the dynamics that made people work helped me a lot in this corporate setup. So that's so that I find very interesting. Now, one of my, so this CloudBees journey lasted for 10 years for me. The company is still going, but I left that 3 years ago and then started a new startup. But anyhow, this journey was like very interesting, but also very challenging. Right? So one of my perpetual struggle has always been to figure out what's the right altitude to come in to the people that's reporting to you or people who's doing actual work. And everybody seems to have figured this out except me. So I'm I always felt a little nervous about it. But so in the early days of the Jenkins project, or at the beginning of this company when it was small, I was mostly really just coming in as a senior IC, right? I wrote all this code. Well, I wrote a good chunk of the code. I designed all the key subsystems. So that meant I could control the way the people who are building on top of the stuff that I built, I could kind of steer them in certain ways. So that's been effective and useful. But obviously that only lasts so much, right? If the company gets bigger beyond a certain point, collectively everybody else is producing a lot more code. So I couldn't do that anymore. So I had to figure out something else. Now, so the few times what I tried was I designed this a key interface, a key boundary, a key structural elements of this new thing that I was building with the whole team. And then let people take things from there. So okay, I built these walls, and you build the kitchen, you build the bedroom, and that so on and so forth. But that didn't really work very well, especially with these senior engineers these capable senior engineers that I had early on. Oftentimes they couldn't just graft their minds on top of these skeletons that I built. Right? When I asked this guy to build a kitchen, he had these ideas of, okay, I wanted to build it this way. But I gave him the boundary that's different from what he wanted to do. So some people would be able to adjust work within the kind of bounds of what I gave him. But other people, most of the people that I worked with just couldn't. And it certainly wasn't motivating to them, right? Because these are builders. If I asked them to build a kitchen, they had this like a grander vision of the kitchen. Their own vision of the kitchen, how to build them. So when what I was doing ended up coming across as kind of constraining to them or like taking the fun away from their work, etc. And then maybe this is also my Japanese psyche, but when this conflict arises or a disagreement arises, I find it just really difficult to bulldoze them over. I know some leaders would be able to like do that without any problem, but I couldn't. And often like that results in like a few months later, they'd come back to me and says, I told you that this is going to be a problem, and here it is, it's going to be a problem. And I felt defensive, and my credibility is getting lost and stuff like that. So I was wondering, okay, how can I do this better? So I decided to try something else. So when I was working on this, like launching a new effort, like going from 0 to 1, and that's when like I wanted to be involved in the most kind of steered directions. So I decided to kind of pair up with another senior engineer. And my idea is like, okay, this guy is going to lead the effort down the road. So I'm going to fly him over to where my office is in Los Altos. And then like we put ourselves in the meeting room for a whole week. And then just sit side by side and get the initial kind of key concept done and nailed and coded. So that was that. Well, that created that worked out a lot better. One, it was fun because we are sitting side by side, hacking together, and then like I'm sure you have this experience. These engineers who are pain in the ass in the emails and Slack communication. But in person, they are like incredibly nice people, right? So like, I was able to exploit that kind of difference. I don't know why it happens, but that's actually, I think that's true. Now, the design disagreements and so on was much easier to handle because we are always looking at this concrete problem. And then I have other ways to kind of, like leverage this relationship. So it was exciting for everybody involved. I was able to calibrate the direction generally into this direction. So, and then he's going to like take it slightly different way, but that was okay. At least he's not going that way, right? So that's the best I can hope for. So this I felt like a good traction, and that lasted for a while. But then the company kept getting bigger, and I can't be involved with every new project launched like this, And then so that also became a problem. So later, when it got much bigger, I still tried something else. So, like you always have more things than you wanted to do, right? Like or your organization can do, because in some sense, like all the problems come to you, and then so you feel like, okay, we need to do this and that and something else, but we only have so many people, so what am I going to do? And then there's this perpetual struggle of like prioritizations and whatnot. But instead of like thinking about like prioritizing things that needs to be done and then assigning people, well, some of that I still did, but instead I started looking for people who happen to have the same sense of problem that share the same sense of problem with, let's say, one of the 15 problems that I was thinking about. And then I say, okay, what you're doing is great, awesome, like please do more of it. And I ask the manager to give him more time to work on this thing because it's really important for the company. And then the people who got like this like a spotlight got really like excited. Suddenly, like what they are hearing is that the freaking CTO is coming to him and saying, well, my project really matters. And then they have always been thinking that this project matters all along, or else they wouldn't be doing it. And so all I needed to do is just put more wood to the fire, encourage them, give them more spotlight, try to give them some more resources, put him on the presentation stage in the conferences, stuff like that. And that really encouraged more. So it was amazing how motivating that was for the people who were doing it. And then I also had this benefit of I didn't have to, prioritize. In some sense, I always feel that maybe there are one or two super important things that you gotta make it happen, but down there, it's okay. If it's not too big of a deal if you pick that or something else. So you'd rather pick something that gets people excited rather than you just come up with a reason that I gotta pick this project. So who's gonna and then I'm gonna put this guy to work on it, and I'm going to try to pitch how important this project is to the person. Like much harder work, right? So that I felt is a very effective way of making things happen in the organizations. So I guess the key theme I'm trying to pitch here that connects all this story, I think, is the sense of ownership. That makes all the difference. Now, in case of open source projects, it literally makes a difference whether somebody actually contributes a project at all. And then the corporate setup, like it's not that stark, right? Most of the people are still happy to take a paycheck and then do some work that they're told to do, but it still makes a huge difference, just as much difference, I would claim. And then so because I saw in this open source project like a real extreme end of what the sense of ownership does, I was able to see that in the corporate setup. And then that to me, that for which I was very grateful. So that was kind of like one key lesson that I learned from this open source project. The other thing that I found was learned is what I call the desire for the alignment, right? So at CloudBees, this company, we had this annual executive offsite, like at the end of the year. We strategize the whole next year. We come up with all these projects we inventory all the projects that we have, and then we come up with all the projects that we needed to do for the next year, which usually needs some adjustment. And then the big reorg ensues, right? So we say, okay, we got this mall is basically the entirety of our company was doing, plus what we wanted to do, right? So you're gonna say, oh, okay, so that grocery store on the left, like it's gonna be one team, and then there's a Target over there, that's gonna be another team. And every year, because this mall shape is changing, because now we have to have a Walmart, then like we have to give a different team. So the boundary it gets reshuffled, and so on and so forth. So whenever, as an executive, when we are in this mode of drawing up the whole diagram, the mold, and trying to divide them up to team and explain how they kind of work together, we naturally cared a lot about alignment. We thought people needed to know what's happening around them, right? And that the resource is limited, so we really couldn't have to be very intelligent and smart and efficient in figuring this out, that there's no room, no single engineer to waste. And that's somewhat true, but then I came back from these executive meetings and when talking to people closer to the ground, I started feeling like, okay, maybe this wasn't actually working as well as I thought. So one time, so we are launching this, we started this new effort, right? I'm sure your company starts a new effort from time to time. The CEO was a really big fan of it, right? So, and then we made a decision that going forward, that should be the foundations of all the other projects, including a breadwinner, this a 10-year-old project that's been making money, real money for the company. And then, so that created all sorts of frustrations because, these established projects, so they started the effort to take this newer project underneath, and they started complaining to us that, oh, the quality is horrible. We have to have more tests, and their interface is changing every day. We can't possibly depend on that. And then this new project that was now, they were initially very excited that they are going to be used by everybody else. That clearly shows the importance. But it turns out that they were distracted into hand-holding these other teams who's going to be using them, as opposed to still trying new things. Because this was still a new project, it needed to figure out the angle to make an impact, what's really sticking with the users. So they really need to be able to change the course every single day, but they are not getting that. So when everything is linked together, everything needs to succeed. And that's really hard, right? You have to have some room for failure, some slack in the system, some room to change the directions. So, and then the other thing is well, we thought we had this a beautiful directory, the mall, that explains where everything is and if the team is doing things. But it turns out that the people on the ground seems to be just as confused as who is doing what, because it changes every freaking year. Right? The name of the team changes. Some people don't even know. Well, in one of the companies I advise, some people don't even know the name of the team that they report to. So that's how bad things are. So just sooner or later, people started rolling their eyes. Oh, that's just another like a reorg that happened at the end of the year. And then that's how I felt. Oh, like we lost this game. So I started to feel like that the maturity is kind of like a key axis to this. That if the younger projects, it's okay that there's like a lack of alignment between some projects, especially between the younger projects and the older projects. And then so that creates the younger projects more time to figure out their space in the world, their place in the world, while the older project has other concerns like the maturity and so on, the test coverage, and it doesn't jeopardize them. So having so it's okay that there's some lack of alignment. Leave some room for failures, especially for new things. That way, I think autonomy gets improved. In large organization, that tends to be useful. The sense of ownership improves because everybody could kind of command their own fate a little better, reduce the communication overhead. So those things kind of make up for some loss of the efficiency. So again, the Jenkins is an extreme example. I told you about this jungle in which like a fittest, survival of the fittest. I don't think in the corporate setup, like you can afford to do 5 things to solve 3 problems. But again, so that's the extreme example. But again, like what that suggests, there's some optimal balance. Maybe maybe you couldn't have that much slack, but you probably don't want to have 0 slack either. So there's somewhere in between that's happy places. So that's the kind of the main pitch that I wanted to do. And then the last thing that I kind of got thinking was, maybe this we leaders tend to think about this reorg as one thing and redraw the diagram, trying to optimize things. But maybe that's actually not a good idea. Like, what if we just, and I remember that, okay, the whole idea of the continuous integration was that massive integration at the end of the game is always painful. So what if we just do it all the time? So I started thinking maybe the reorg should be also continuous, like just to make a small adjustment every day or every week. And then that might largely preserve what people perceive around them and what these people around them are doing, but still making a small project and gradually let you do that. And it always have some room for slack and lack of alignment. So that's something I'd love to try when I have opportunity next time. And so those are the things I learned by doing Jenkins project about teams. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Couple of things that actually stood out for me also from that talk is like ownership and trust, essentially. Like those are the 2 things you kind of like look at when you start building a team also for that matter, is that how can we instill ownership in this team so that they can go and build their systems themselves. And trust is a big factor where you're motivating people to say that I trust you to do the right thing at the end of the day. Cool, let's go through quick questions here. Can you share some insights on what makes volunteer open source communities thrive?
Right, yeah. So I only have one so I'm like a one-trick pony here. And then that one trick is just say yes, basically. So people show up. People always want to do something on top of what you do. It's just that you tend to disagree with what they do. So create a setup that allows you to say yes. So the way I did it is, if I had to take on what somebody wanted to do, well, I'm not going to do that, right? And looking at somebody else's code is always painful, right? So I designed the system which they're going to own what they build, and I don't have to see what they have built. So that's the way for me to say yes. But there are other ways to, I think, say yes, but that's the trick. Say yes.
Sweet. Thank you. All right, going to the next one here. Can you discuss how automation and DevOps practices in Jenkins influenced your views on engineering management and modern tech landscape?
I'm not sure. So the automation and DevOps practice influenced my view. I think it's probably the other way around. If anything, I think my view on I don't know. I guess it's. So I thought, this is a good question. So maybe one story I share is, so in this talk, like I promoted this like extreme wild chaos, right? That is the natural system. But in the corporate setup, especially at the large scale shop, they need more centralized, like one path to do it all to make a difference fast enough. So I started to appreciate the value of like more uniformity, like one way to do things, even if it creates some friction at the ground level, which is why people hate working for a big company, but collectively it could be good. So I argue from both ends of my mouth. Yeah.
We'll take one more question here. I think this one's a good one. Have you ever had to play referee between passionate open source contributors, and how do you keep the peace between the tech Wild West?
Yeah, so yes, well, so I didn't have to do this until I had to. And then like by the time I noticed that I had to do these things, like it was a little too late, I think in hindsight. So what we did was like we decided to, the same approach, like a spotlight, the good thing, we thought. If you have 5 solutions, and then I thought this is a good one, like I started becoming more proactive in saying, yeah, this is a good, like everybody, like go look at this, like this is the best one. And then so in that sense, well, we later created more curated set of plugins, so things like that, yeah.
Sweet. Thank you once again, Kosuke, for sharing your knowledge with us on how this is going to help us.